most of those, a vast majority of those fires get caught at initial attack. When we do have that many fires on the landscape, a few do escape and become large fires. Below the line there, you see 9 significant human-caused fires that are interspersed there. Those also challenge the system as we are busy battling the lightning fires. When we have the human-caused ignitions, those really do add stress to the system. Focusing in on one of the events here, there were mass ignitions from that storm I mentioned, 816, 817, put approximately, initially we knew about 50 fires out on the landscape in eastern Oregon. We were heavily engaged with our partners in other agencies out there, initial attacking those fires, employing the severity aircraft. One of the challenges that comes with lightning events is the holdover fires or sleeper fires that we see pop up over the next 5 to 7 days after lightning storms when the conditions are conducive to fire spread. So with this event, we certainly saw that. Ultimately, about 80 fires out there on the landscape in eastern Oregon. Most of those were caught small, but a real challenge was the smoke from the other existing wildfires on the landscape. And we just literally couldn't see. So we just saw a presentation that highlighted mountaintop cameras. We have the smoky environment. Those mountaintop cameras are limited in being able to detect fires. What we're showing here in the lower left corner, this is infrared aircraft detection, and this was actually a military aircraft we were able to access. These aren't always available, but at this time we did get a flight, and this is a DRTI aircraft. That stands for Distributed Real-Time Infrared. So that aircraft picked up 9 fires through the smoke that we did not know were on the landscape. This fire you see here was about 4/10 of an acre. They were able to catch that in initial attack. Of the 9 fires that were detected by that flight, one of them was over 100 acres that we didn't even know was out there on the landscape. And so our field staff in eastern Oregon estimate that at least 2 of those fires would have been significant large fires that would have cost multi-million dollars. So having this kind of technology available to us, in addition to the mountaintop cameras, the aerial detection flights we do, is really a key resource. This is a statewide fire map. There's a lot of data there, so I'll just highlight a few key points. The punched out fires there that are highlighted, there are 9 significant fires that affected ODF jurisdiction. On those fires, we did deploy 7 ODF incident management teams throughout the summer, also augmented with a Florida incident management team that we brought in because we were short capacity, so we mobilized in using severity funding a state of Florida type 1 incident management team, and they took over the Garner complex later in the fire, and that freed up one of our teams to do other business. So that was a key resource. Also, of these 9 significant fires, 6 of those were eligible for FEMA Fire Management Assistance Grants, which is offsetting about $20 million of suppression costs for us. So a key resource. And then at the peak, we had about 7,000 firefighters engaged across Oregon on those fires. Going into the ODF data here a little bit. So on Oregon Department of Forestry jurisdiction, we had about 904 fires year to date. We're on track to exceed our 10-year average, which is right around 947 fires. We would anticipate somewhere around 100 more fires yet this fire season. So we are on track to exceed that 10-year average. Of those at this time, 213 are lightning, 691 human-caused, and that tracks right about with our historical average of human-caused fires contributing about 2/3 of our
Could you repeat that again? Human-caused or how many?
691.
2/3.
2/3.
Human-caused.
Yep.
And of those 2/3, when I assume not every human-caused was intentional, do we have a breakout of those that we know were intentional?
We do, yeah.
Doug Graff here. A sad comment here is I do know about a 10-year average for arson fires where we have identified those as intentionally set, and we sit in about 30 arson fires. These are fires not intentionally set. They're not willful or malicious. Vehicles, campfires, grinding, a number of different ways.
Or an average of 30 a year.
Yeah, and we're far less than that this year. We have an arson program coordination with state police that we put out. They're very successful this year. Didn't have that pressure in the system. Other years we've had that.
And this is a little off topic, but those that are human caused in the current environment we're in are having, I assume, an exponentially bigger impact on the environment than maybe 20 years ago because of conditions.
Because of the acres burn, absolutely. And you'll see in the next slide, you can see the acres burn as we move there.
Yeah, the numbers we have year to date, fortunately, we are below average, about 50% of average actually on arson fires, 15 total ignitions for 9 acres. So nice to see that number lower than average at this point. Moving into the acres burn here, year to date, we're sitting at 71,000 acres and adding, unfortunately, based on some texts we got this morning. Of those, about 26,000 acres are human caused, 44,000 lightning caused. So those lightning events that, as I mentioned, overwhelm the initial attack system tend to drive the larger portion of the acres burned.
And those are just state acres. That doesn't include public private or federal.
That is correct. And so the context there is, in Oregon, all jurisdictions, we're just about to 1,800 fires for about 800,000 acres. So we have about half the fires, about 10% of the acres burned on ODF jurisdiction.
So,
That's an interesting number, too.
I have a question that I assume, given the number of briefings you're having to give right now, you may not have this available. But for future discussion, I'm going to be asking about the average time between detection and response, because one of the things I'm hoping to discuss in the next session is a conversation about rural fire protection districts, and perhaps it's time to maybe not replicate CAL FIRE, but put people out there so that the fires aren't quite as big when you inherit them, or we can put some out before. So I'm curious, as far as when a lightning strike, I'm assuming that's often in places where people aren't hanging out, and getting responses out there. What is the time it takes to basically, on average, get something going to try to put it out? And if there's ways we can help you with that, because of the size and scale of what's going on. And again,
Appreciate that, and we can provide that data. Our fire reporting system captures the time between from reporting to initial
and
attack.
please understand, it's not from a perspective of saying you guys should be faster, but rather what tools do you need, because the state seems to be getting drier. So, thank you.
Good question.
Yes, sir.
Just thank you, Mr. Chair, just because we've touched on it a little bit, so I just quickly made a couple of notes. And maybe you gave a sense, I thought I heard the 71,000 acre number. Was that USFS acres? Did I hear
Chair Evans,
71,000?
Representative Post, that is ODF protected acres, 71,000.
ODF protected. Okay, then follow up.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea how many acres, just that's of this summer, that's burned in Oregon on USFS ground versus private owned?
Or BLM.
Yeah. So let Doug.
Yeah, or BLM, federal.
Representative Post, Chair Evans. So approximately just over 800,000 acres burned across all jurisdictions within the state of Oregon. So
71,000 minus.
Well, there's a multiple jurisdictions. So on the U.S. Forest Service, approximately 300,000 acres have burned on the U.S. Forest Service. An interesting story for this year and this fire season is the wheat country in north central Oregon. We burned approximately 300,000 acres in that region. Then our 70 plus just over 70,000. The remainder of the acres fall on BLM in the east side, the range in the east side. National Park Service has fires in Crater Lake. Fish and Wildlife has some acres burned. So you add all those jurisdictional responsibilities. For ODF protection, we have 16 million acres of forest land protection and grazing land within our protection boundaries that we're responsible for. That's what we report out to the legislature, and the financial responsibility for suppression follows, and that's where we report out. But statewide, those are the numbers. And making that contextual difference is important, because folks do not just want to know what burned on ODF protected lands, but what, across the state, how we impact it.
That's the question I get asked the most.
Right.
Understand.
Well, and on the wheat issue, when you say wheatlands, most of that is privately owned then, right? Or is that also leased ground that they...
The 300,000 acres mainly privately owned. There's scattered BLM jurisdictional responsibility in the canyon lands.
Right.
As you drop off the plateau and fall into the canyons, that's where you have BLM responsibility.
And that amount of wheatlands being burned is, I assume, an exceptional case that doesn't happen most years.
Absolutely exceptional, and not all of it was crop land that was burned. When I state the wheat area, just that region
Right.
of the country, you'd have to speak with agriculture to determine how much wheat acres was actually lost. But in terms of the fire perimeter acres burned in that region, that's what we've noted.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yep,
Sorry, just
Absolutely.
just because it was mentioned earlier, and I'm still learning verbiage, when you say still in the landscape. So I, again, thought I heard the Klondike and the Miles fires are still in the landscape. So is that true? And also, why do you think they're still burning, and who's responsible?
So right now, that is true. The Miles and the Klondike fire are what we would call uncontained. So the Miles fire has a high percentage of containment, but still is not completely contained. The Klondike fire is still actively burning in the Kalmiopsis wilderness, and it added about 8,000 acres yesterday with the severe east wind conditions we're having. So it still has open line. It just is in a place that is pretty inaccessible and not safe to put firefighters. So they are actively dropping with helicopters and trying to box that thing in and bring it out to containment lines still.
Okay. Representative Parrish?
Yeah, I was a little hypersensitive to fire season this year. My oldest was on the Taylor Creek fire this year. And so that leads me to a question, though. We read a lot. I think there were a lot of articles this year, more so than I've ever seen on fire season in the news. One of them suggested that, our current tactic of fire suppression is probably not helping the fires in subsequent years. And so how many of these fires, when you say we've had, gave us a number of how many the state's been involved in, are we actively trying to suppress versus letting naturally burn out? Are we trying to suppress every single one of these that pops up, or are we letting nature sort of take its course?
Good.
And recognizing it's your first time, we'll try to keep some of the questions to the topic, but it's a great question, I think.
Parish Chair Evans. All the fires, during the fire season and peak fire season have been identified as full suppression fires across all jurisdictions. For ODF protection responsibility, which is mainly private lands in and around our communities, and then we have public lands, approximately 4 million acres of that BLM agreement, and then state forest, county forest. We are 100% minimize acres burned, minimize cost, minimize resource loss, always a full suppression cost. During the peak of fire season, you'll see this entire year and last season, all full suppression fires. On the edges of fire season is where the conversation, where I start to get comfortable about perhaps there's other, with the federal agencies that have opportunities to have more resource benefit fires, as I'm missing the term, but not during the peak of fire season, because the transfer risk potential onto other lands would be significantly challenged there.
Can I follow up, different question? On the human cause, because I think that number always shocks people, right? We just think it's all lightning and, are there trends over that 10-year period you showed us on the human-caused fires that lead us to believe that there are policy changes that need to happen in order to reduce fires? I mean, we had a bill, I don't know if some of you recall, about releasing lanterns, those paper lanterns or whatever, and it sounded kind of stupid and hokey, and people are like, why are you doing that? But we're doing that because we don't want hundreds of thousands of acres to burn for human-caused fires. So are there other trends like that that we see in the human-caused arena that lead us to believe that there are policy changes we need to make around when people are using our campgrounds, or when you're out in the woods hunting, or, I mean, whatever is driving that? Do we have any sense of that?
Repairs Chair Evans, absolutely, human-caused fires are a key driver, right? 75 to 80% of our acres burned are lightning, but we do not turn a blind eye, obviously, to human-caused fire, critical component. We partner with Keep Oregon Green, is our public outreach nonprofit arm, to educate Oregonians about the challenges of human-caused wildfires. They do a great job. As I've looked at the trends, when Keep Oregon Green has been engaged for over 75 years, we've ranged within the 600 to 800 human-caused fires pretty consistently over the last 75 years. We had a real dip when Keep Oregon Green was first initiated. This is following World War II. Folks came back, engaged in the woods, a lot of activity. So there's a dip in human-caused fires. You have to go back 70 years. But it's been pretty steady there. We are always interested in assessing the policies around minimizing acres burned and minimizing human-caused fires. So certainly always looking at that for all types of human-caused fires on the landscape.
Okay, these are great questions.